So I'd like to start, this section of the meeting, I share different contexts, different principles, values related to symbiotic culture and building these kind of community networks. Today, I want to talk about this larger vision. It started, actually, I'm still finishing my book, and my plan was to finish the book and then maybe develop one or two prototype communities as I'm finishing it. But then I got a call from Shannon now, probably 4 or 5 months ago. And Shannon had a really deep concern about global food insecurity and her own region's capacity to take care of itself. So that's Brevard County, Florida. And so Shannon asked me really two questions. One is, how do we do this locally? And how can we spread this globally? And a lot of times people use the word scale. I'll just say spreading might be better, because scale usually involves like a tech concept, and that typically is top down, which is not what this is. So these questions that Shannon was asking, how do you do it locally? How do you spread it globally? It reminded me of an experience I had sitting next to Barbara Marx Hubbard, as many of you know, the beloved futurist, human being, and she was a dear friend. And she said, Richard, when people are faced with a natural or human-made disaster, they seem to be able to come together, unify across the normal fragmentation. And like today, we would see it as intense polarization. So people come together, they unify, maybe it's a couple days, maybe it's a week, but once the crisis seems to subside, what she said was people just go back to sleep into their own tribes, some communities. And she asked me, and she really did ask, this is an amazing question. She goes, Richard, is there any way for people to be open to this kind of openness of being of service and cooperation 24/7? Is that possible? And then she said, could this sensibility spread globally? And it was like, at the time I was working on a tech platform to emulate some of the community work. So at that time I was thinking more in tech terms. Now I'm talking specifically about building trust networks in face-to-face, in real life, in communities, wherever they may be. So the answer to all these questions, I believe, is yes. So the first question, it is possible for people to go beyond crisis orientation and come together on an ongoing basis to build community. I've seen it with my own eyes. I participated within it. And I know the Sarvodaya movement in Sri Lanka, they've been doing this successfully for 60 years. And it's also possible to galvanize the energies of a whole community, but specifically around the passions that people already have. And finally, yes, I believe it's possible to spread this rapidly globally to 50,000 villages and towns worldwide in 10 years. And then the question obviously is, how is that even possible in such a short period of time? So I'd like to share with you today why I believe not only is this possible, but it's essential for survival. No, we don't have a luxury of pipe dreams. We really need practical solutions as well. Obviously, a deep vision, but practical solutions to implement where we live. So I want to go back in my previous work, kind of how this idea developed, and I'm going to do it, I'm hopeful, in less than 10 minutes. So when I was really young, I had an experience, and I call it of the luminous web. It was a spiritual experience where I felt connected to everything, just a total connection, myself, my family, my neighbors, my town, the world, all life. And it was a wonderful experience. And then as I got into my teens, I started studying biology, became a biologist, primarily marine biology and evolutionary biology. And what I saw was that within nature, especially in hiking and rock climbing and outdoors, how nature is like a emulation of this luminous web. Nature's web is emulating this connectivity, and we see it and observe it through ecosystems, say a forest ecosystem. But then I started to, as I got older into my late teens, I started looking at human society, and I began to see fragmentation, like we were somehow going against this underlying reality of connection, and how life could be a battlefield, and the conflict that we see today, and it's global, and it seems to be accelerating. So back to my story, Logan Heights, 1991, it was actually a battlefield. It was a gang and drug-infested low-income neighborhood in San Diego, 40 drug dealers literally on a street corner, sent by the Mexican mafia literally to be like street level dealers. A person was shot dead in the street in front of our first community meeting. What I learned from that experience was I was fortunate at that time to find out about Sarvodaya in Sri Lanka and how they've actually built a movement of an ecosystem of organizations, how they built these networks in each local community today, and more than 5,000 of them. So what I learned in that experience in Logan Heights is it's possible to bring together a community around a felt need. Here we got multi-ethnic group of organization leaders, nonprofit leaders, religious leaders, business leaders, political leaders, outside community leaders. We got everybody together in an action network that was truly collaborative. No egos were present, just the focus on a function, deal with this problem. And we ended up reducing crime in that neighborhood of 50,000 people by 75%. The main takeaway first is it didn't spread beyond that neighborhood. That network didn't go to San Diego County and beyond. So that was a learning that I'm taking to the next region that I live. Second is that even though we created this huge dramatic change in reduction of crime and the feeling of safety in the community, we didn't make a dent into what I believe is the underlying cause of poverty, lack of ownership. 85% of the homes and businesses in that neighborhood were owned by people outside. So cash was flowing out of that neighborhood into the San Diego mainstream economy, into the national economy of the US, and into the world economy. And this is going to be important later in the story as it relates to our methodology and strategy. So fast forward to Reno, Nevada, 2003. There, the felt crisis was the size of Reno in that county. Washoe County was growing, so it became a magnet for large chains, more Walmarts, Starbucks. People were really excited to get our first In-N-Out burger, and a number of donut chains. I mean, Chili's, everything started, influx, and it created a sensibility amongst Main Street business owners and local leaders, nonprofit leaders, that it was going to create a challenge. So we were able to build what's called a local living economy network with 500 or more leaders of nonprofits, for-profits, and local government. While most of the previous efforts up to then focused on attracting large companies to a region to generate economic growth, what we did was we actually created a movement from within so that businesses can now feel supportive, mutual aid, mutual support, created the marketplace. That created vibrancy and a whole new strategy for the region, including a lot of the large players. Economic Development Authority later added that strategy of building from within as part of their program. So we made a real impact. 2 years later, what was really interesting is a lot of people were talking about food at that time. We're talking about 2005, so almost 20 years ago. And at the time, the political and business leaders of the region really thought that the best use of farmland, which was about 30 miles from Reno, that the best use of the farmland was to pave it over, make a parking lot, a strip mall, or a condo, and part of it was to get property tax increments. So this led to a local food system network, which we've been talking about in the previous videos, which I'm not going to define right now, but it led to a full-on network, and it was a catalyst for secondary effects. And one would be the city of Reno invested to build the first public farmers market, connecting farmers to restaurateurs and consumers in general. New food co-op that really took off and accelerated, became one of the fastest growing food co-ops in the US. And we helped to create a context for that. Expanded the number of community-supported ag programs, build a food hub, and there was just so much more that I don't want to go into. The next sector was arts and culture. We came together around local living economy, local food, the arts, supporting local environment, healthy environment, people on the margins. And we had a series of large public events, these expos. First year, we had almost 1,000 people attend. The next year, we had almost 2,000, discontinued for a variety of reasons, but it was extremely successful. So we had this experience of building these, I would call them sector networks. So as you can see, without going into detail, and many of you probably have seen other illustrations like this, and there are many ways to indicate sectors of community. We did it by function. First, it's part of the experience of the Sarvodia movement, like what worked with them in 60 years of experience. And then we began applying that methodology of what they call 10 basic needs. And we realized that about half of the basic needs of a community in Asia, that's a village community, about half of them apply to urban Western communities, both towns and cities. Without getting into this, what we're going to describe is a build out process of independent but interdependent sector networks, bringing together leaders of nonprofits, for-profits, and local government, because we found that people like to network around their passions. So this is not an abstract formulation. This is not like coming out of academia. This is not coming out of some intellectual formulation. This is from the experience not only of Sarvodia, but my experience and the experience of tons of other community across the world. So we took those best practices and then we started building maybe 5 of these networks out of the 12. The bottom line is what we realized is that starting with spirituality, values clarification, universal principles, that then created a network around that in a community, a social network, that then generated a culture of connectivity and a vision and a dream for a better world, starting with a community. And that led to these networks, which created an economic effect in a local community, whether it's a town or a city. And then I'd like to describe the political effects without having to lobby a city council or a county commission or a state assembly or legislature. We were able to implement policy changes because of the raising of the awareness, for example, around local economy, local food. It shifted the policies of our local government and county government, and eventually the state. The state of Nevada eventually adopted We Think Local as something to be shared throughout all the towns and cities in Nevada at that time. So that's something to keep in mind as part of this process of layers. Because in a sense, what we're doing is we're inverting the financial and political pyramid of power on the planet, and it can happen within each community. And this is the basis for why we believe this can happen fractally or simultaneously over a period of time and how this can emerge. So I want to just close by talking about what we've learned both from Sarvodia's experience in Sri Lanka, the experience that I've had in the communities I've worked in, stages of community development. The first stage is values activation. So basically what's happening is people are grounding their experience, they're grounding their personal values, they're valuing and acknowledging their spiritual values, their interior life as important. That becomes what we call symbiotic culture DNA. So that DNA is important because then as people align with their shared values and principles, which we discovered that are universal, that is, they could be acceptable in any worldview, whether it's traditional, modern, postmodern, or metamodern. It can be something that religious people can relate to, spiritual but not religious people can relate to, atheists were participating, secular but secular humanists, and civic activists who don't necessarily have a spiritual grounding. It was possible to create a space that this was the new norm. So we prepare in phase 1 to hold space for the community in the bioregion. So each person is starting to open their heart, open their mind, and start to hold that as a possibility. You're opening your heart and holding space for the community as a whole beyond your individual sensibility, your family, your neighborhood, or your organization, or your business, whatever your interest is. What seems to happen is people are now holding space for the whole community beyond any individual interest. The second is social network and cultural preparation. So what's happening is that a team is starting to be built. People naturally find others that are in alignment with this intention, these principles, these values, which seem to be universal. And a social network starts to build, and that's using existing tech. The third level is economic cooperation and impact. So you go beyond the spiritual, then the social networking and cultural preparation. Now it's at the level of actually initiating your first symbiotic networks with other leaders of nonprofits, for-profits, and local government. We've already seen the chart, and there are 12 symbiotic networks that are developing. It could be sequentially, it could be simultaneous, like what happened in our experience. At this point, you're adding digital communication, collaboration, and coordinating functions. Those are layers that then add to what's already now experienced in face-to-face trust networks. So I want you to imagine at this third stage how 12 people in a community in each sector become catalytic connectors. They build a highly resonant group of 5 people. Usually takes a month or 2 to do that. Then it becomes 15. Then in their sector, each in their sector bringing 100 leaders together for the first public meeting. So we're talking about 12 leaders attracting 60 leaders, then 200, then more than 1,000 leaders in these 12 interdependent networks. So part of what's happening is you're building this trust network of mutual aid and new business and trading relationships that form a new local marketplace. And that's what happened in Reno, Nevada, and Washoe County over a period of years. We believe we could accelerate that now. 4 is regional governance and planning for self-sufficient community. So what's happening, and especially with the Sarvodia case, they've developed 5,000 coherent, what they call a Sarvodia society that becomes the nucleus for the bioregional connectivity and the ecosystem building. For lack of a better name, we're calling it a symbiotic society. It's developing organically. It's not something that's imposed on people in the beginning, kind of like a franchise model. That's not what this is about. This is not about imposing anything on any community without their voluntary cooperation. It's a matter of providing tools for them. So a symbiotic society is becoming a new parallel institution in the community, and it's developing naturally from emerging leadership. Leadership here is part of there's quote hierarchy, but it's a growth hierarchy. It's a growth hierarchy in the sense that the people that are leaders, they are not appointed, they are not, getting at it because of political power seeking. They're not using it as a stepping stone. It's not about how much money you have. It's about your capacity to share your Rolodex, to be generous with your connections, and to open up your networks to others so that all these networks can start to connect with each other. And that's how leadership emerges. And as you can see at this level of governance, the development of this parallel society then starts to really facilitate the changes of the economic conditions in the region, and it starts to make a scalable political change at the local, county, and then the state level. So the stage 5 is once this emergent activity is developed, this coherence, the region starts consciously focusing on import substitution. They start identifying areas. For example, in a particular region like northern Nevada, maybe we're importing a ton of tomatoes, but greenhouse tomatoes are possible. There's a ton of geothermal energy there. There's efforts already in Nevada, for example, to dehydrate garlic, one of the huge capacities to do that. So that's a systematic approach across 12 sectors, looking for ways to increase local production of goods and services within the region. And that is a conscious process and a totally public, transparent, emergent activity. And the final phase, 6, is larger regional cooperation happens, and it starts affecting greater geographies. Now, this idea that I've shared with you, I can't claim that I came up with this myself. I'm just following past leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, who actually had this, what he called a strategy for building a Commonwealth of village republics in India. Thomas Jefferson in the United States, or in the colonies, had a similar decentralized vision for America, and he called it a Commonwealth of Ward Republics. This is a universal idea. You can even trace it back thousands of years, but this is the lineage. And Dr. A.T.R. Ratne in Sri Lanka took this previous knowledge from Mahatma Gandhi directly in the mid-50s, and he started applying this and implementing it. So it's real. It's actually happening on the planet right now in 5,000 villages and towns in Sri Lanka. What we're talking about is expanding their experience, using the experience that I've had and many, many others, for example, on this call, to put it all together to create a combined joint effort to help in the emergence and activation of bioregional communities. Now, it has to be done in a really unique, gentle, organic way. It can't be done by, for example, forming a global network and then imposing it on communities, and then all of a sudden these communities say, yeah, we're part of that global network. It doesn't work that way. So the paradox is it has to happen emergently in each community, but it has to happen in a way so that the communities themselves are activating it and owning it and growing it themselves. And our role as Symbiotic Culture Lab, and many of you on this call, would be to help support communities with all the talent, the genius, the skills and resources we have, putting it all together in a coherent process. And we're really open to that. We just have one piece that we are sharing, which is this network weaving, the identification of this universal glue, the cultural piece that we've developed that works. And what we imagine, like the case of going from a local community to the state level in Nevada, what we're imagining is a new bottom-up global trading system. It would be like a countervailing power financially, socially, spiritually, economically, politically at each locality around the planet, but linked in a trading network that's transnational. So it knows no boundaries. And yet it focuses on the local regions where we live. And then it connects other regions that are doing the same thing to start trading between regions. And that keeps emerging geographically. If you can imagine the planet, seeing it from space as a sphere, a beautiful blue marble, you can imagine as points of light that are emerging, and then they start connecting and they start building these actual webs. These are not just spiritual webs. These are actual webs of trading goods and services and mutual aid. And it all starts with what I would call spiritual sovereignty, which is the sense that within us is the capacity universally to connect with something higher than ourselves, something greater than ourselves. Now, in religion, they might call that God. Some people call it higher power. It's not important. What's important is that this vertical connection with this greater power that we're part of is the basis for transforming ourselves, as all of us know, but it's then put into action. So the spirituality that we're describing here is an embodied spirituality that then emerges within people, within their groups, within their communities, within these networks. The spirit then travels through nodes of intersection, which are the groups and organizations in a community, and it uplifts the whole community as scaffolding only. We are not building the building. We are just creating a context and a gentle frame for people to connect across the divides that have been artificially imposed by leaders nationally and globally who would like us to be divided. It serves their interest. And the time has come for us to put aside these differences and focus on what we have in common to build and activate ourselves, these community networks of love, but also of action and of real economic and political impact where we live. And that's why I believe this is possible, because it takes a new kind of leadership, a distributed leadership, then it could spread organically. And it's a matter of bringing the players together. And I'm so happy that all of you have come together today, and let's just keep going like we're all doing.